2011 was filled with memorable game releases, being an important year for the game industry. The RPG genre in particular had one of its best years ever, witnessing the release of Skyrim, Dark Souls and The Witcher 2, three classics that still hold up and are still celebrated to this day, all in the same year. What most might not remember, however, is that right after this year full of classics, in February 2012, there was another RPG release that was supposed to be remembered as a classic, but ended up forgotten. The first game of an ambitious RPG franchise that was supposed to evolve into an MMO to rival World of Warcraft. I'm talking about Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning. And somewhere in the UK, a British woman wakes up in a cold sweat, feeling a pain as if 10,000 spears pierce the teabag that she calls her heart. Sensing that someone has mentioned Kingdoms of Amalur failing. It's okay, Alan. Don't worry, it's just a dream. Kingdoms of Amalur is an undeniable classic that has taken over the industry and everyone loves it. There's Amalur merch everywhere. People lose their minds when the 150th Amalur commercial is played on TV. Steam top-selling games have all been 20 different Amalur games for over 15 years at this point. And whenever someone says Amalur, people lose their minds and start screaming like boy band fangirls until they pass out. It's okay, don't worry, you can go back to sleep. Just close your eyes and everything will be alright. Okay, now that we've dealt with that, we can actually talk about Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning and why it was forgotten. First, let's talk about the basic premise of the game. Your character starts off being brought back to life by gnomes with the power of something named the Well of Souls. Totally not ominous name of something that is definitely not questionable and totally doesn't have obvious drawbacks to it. Before you can get any further into the context of the game, you can customize your character with 4 races available. 2 of them are different human types and the other 2 are the Dark and the Light Elves. And then you can name your character. After that, the gnomes will be surprised that you are alive and that their totally not sinister project worked. But before they can get any deeper into that, you're interrupted by an invasion of the Tuatha. The Tuatha are a subsect of Fae, the magical creatures with immortal souls that inhabit this world. The Tuatha, unlike their fellow Fae, have turned hostile and seek to destroy all mortal races. As they wreak havoc on the gnomish lab, your character makes a run for it, and before leaving the lab is told by the gnome that brought them back to life to meet with a Fate Weaver. Basically Amalur's fortune tellers that actually work and it's not just a scam. Conveniently, the man is just sitting just outside the tower, so finding him is no trouble. As you're trying to talk to him, you're interrupted by the Tuatha again that have followed you. After defeating them, the Fate Weaver Argath is impressed that you are able to manipulate the threads of fate, something no mortal should be able to do. It might be really impressive to him, but I just pressed F and mashed the button, so no big deal. After failing to read your fate, he then tells you to meet a more experienced Fate Weaver, who happens to be dead as soon as you arrive in his house, with a dark elf named Aileen Shear in the crime scene. She seems to recognize you, but before you get any explanations, she just vanishes. And Argath bursts into the house, with his friend Dad, beneath you. Yeah, not a good look. He says that he needs to take you to a place named Della. If you suppose that this place would be some kind of prison because you seemingly just killed a fellow Fate Weaver of this guy, you'd be wrong, he just doesn't care. This place is an ancient ruin where lies the Theater of Fate, the place where the Fate Weavers learn to read fate. Orgath follows you certain that he will die to an Ettin in the middle of the path, but instead he witnesses you save him, removing this Ettin from existence. As you reach the central part of the Theater of Fate, the Destiny Stones, Orgath asks you to put your hands on them, and as he suspected up until this point, he learns that you have no fate, where the generic name for the player character comes from, the Fateless One. Before you can get any deeper into that, you're interrupted by the Tuatha following you, but this time Aelin Shear shows up to assist you. After the fight, Aelin Shear proposes to help you finding and destroying the scrying device that the Tuatha are using to follow you. Orgath is not quick to trust the Dark Elf, but acknowledges that she might be the only help you can get to defeat the Tuatha. And if anything, the player character is the only hope of turning the tides of the battle of the Tuatha against the mortal races. And so begins the greater quest of winning this war. While the game is not difficult at all, so you shouldn't expect anything challenging even in the hardest difficulty, it is definitely really fun to play with the many class combinations and its simple combo system. The game's skill system is a very traditional RPG one. As you level up, you gain 3 points to spend. There are 3 skill trees: Might, Finesse and Sorcery. Might is your regular warrior skill tree, Finesse is a mix of rogue and ranger, and Sorcery is for all your magic needs. Once you choose skills on a tree, you're not locked out of the others. So, if you want to, you can combine multiple skills from different trees to form creative combinations. But by doing so, you will forsake some of the higher tier skills, which are incredibly powerful. Based on how many points you put on each tree, the game allows you to gain access to different fates. Each of them gives buffs that are appropriate to the investments that you've made. To complement that, for completing chapters of the story or faction questlines, you earn cards called Twists of Fate, which give you strong buffs to your character, and combined with the sets that you earn for each faction, can considerably enhance your character's power. If a player doesn't like the choices that they have made in their skill tree, or wishes to try something completely different, they can talk to a Fate Weaver to respect for a small fee. At a point this fee just becomes negligible, so you really have to ask yourself why this was a thing in the first place. But regardless, the game doesn't try to force you to remain locked with whatever skills you have chosen. Besides the skill points, players also gain 1 attribute point per level. The attributes are overall not important for combat, except for the stealth attribute, and alchemy, blacksmithing and sage crafting are all crafting skills. Players at all times have 2 weapons and a shield available to them. Each weapon type has different attack speeds and unique combos that can be performed with them. Players can explore different combos by swapping weapons mid-combat, and even cancelling some moves with rolls and shields. Blocking reduces damage partially. If pressed at the right time, blocking can perfect block, creating a slow motion effect and staggering the enemy. Rolling is important in combat as well, but it's not Dark Souls levels of important, even if you might feel extremely tempted to keep doing it. The game also includes a stealth system with a designated button to enter sneaking mode. The AI is not particularly good at detecting the player, even with no points in the stealth attribute, so you can cheese enemies if you want, and take them out with stealth attacks even after you're caught. Over time, by hitting enemies with spells, stealth attacks or combos, players gain Fate Meter. Once the Fate Meter is full, they can hold down their Reckoning button to enter Reckoning mode for a few seconds. Reckoning mode slows down enemies, increases all damage done by the player, and cause enemies to be downed instead of killed while it's active. The player can press the interact button on any of the downed enemies to perform a finisher. During the finisher, the game will show a button that can be mashed to increase the experience gain after Reckoning mode ends. Once the finisher ends, all downed enemies are killed, ending Reckoning mode. The world of Kingdoms of Amalur is another strong point of the game. While the cartoony World of Warcraft-like visual style might not be something for everyone, it is hard to say that the scenarios themselves aren't interesting. Besides the theory being a desert area clearly inspired by Arizona and the Grand Canyon, all areas resemble some Celtic lands and Lord of the Rings scenarios, with, for example, Alabastra being strongly reminiscent of Mordor. Daylentarf has this mystical forest look to it. The plains of Irotel have a certain Celtic aesthetic, especially with the castle ruins found in it. The theory, like said before, is the one region that doesn't follow the general aesthetic of the game. Cluricon is a swamp mostly abandoned during the war, and Alabastra is a dark mountainous region with nearly no vegetation. The regions by themselves tell a story, with the devastation left in the wake of the Tuatha, which is clear in Cluricon and Alabastra, being contrasted with the beauty of the lands that they still didn't manage to take over. There are also many stories told by the scenarios that don't really have any formal explanation and leave the conclusions to the player's imagination, such as the giant bones found in the theory, possibly from a dragon. It is clear, however, that Daylentarf and the Plains of Irotel received more attention from the developers than the other regions, with development being rushed starting from somewhere around the middle of the theory. The quantity of side quests and details found in the two first zones is larger than all the other maps combined. While the theory does have a bunch of side quests, 20 of the 38 side quests found in the region are completely located within the capital city, Edessa, and Apotheri, which is a small western-inspired town just outside of Edessa. One of the telling signs that this game had a rushed development is that after going through Daylentarf and the Plains of Irotel, you will see very few new enemy models. For the most part, enemies will just keep repeating. And don't get me wrong, the enemy designs in this game are great, but it's really unfortunate to not get to see at least a few new enemies, especially as you progress further into the game. It is particularly weird that the deeper that you get into Tuatha territory, the less things change. You'd expect that they would have some kind of cool enforcer type unique enemies the closer that you got to the end of the game. But no, just regular enemies that you have seen the entire game up until this point. Now remember that I said that the regions resemble Celtic lands? Well, if it wasn't clear that the visual inspirations came from the Celtic countries, the enemy designs and their names definitely give it away. The Tuatha are based on the Tuatha Dé Danann, the pantheon of Irish mythology. There are also clear parallels between the Battle of Martuha and the Battle for Melsanshire. In Irish mythology, the Tuatha Dé Danann invade Ireland and take the land from the Firbalad. In-game, the Tuatha take over the lands to the east from the mortals. The arrival of the Tuatha Dé Danann is foreseen by the king of the Firbalad, the same way that in the game the war with the Tuatha is foreseen by fate. In Irish mythology, the Tuatha Dé Danann conquer Ireland but fall under the oppression of the Formonians, hostile monstrous beings that were first said to come from under the sea and under the earth, to later be referred as sea raiders and giants. They were led by Balor, a cyclopic giant that wreaked destruction whenever he opened his eye. In-game, the Tuatha are the ones who oppress the peoples of Amalur and make a pact with Balor, who is a giant Niskaru lord that unleashes a beam when he opens his eye, similarly to the Formonian leader. The second battle of Martuha ends with Lu felling Bala, with his body crushing 27 Formonian soldiers and his head falling on the king of the Formonians. In-game, the Battle of Melsenshire ends with Balor being struck down and crushing the armies of the Tuatha beneath him, with the Tuatha then retreating, acknowledging that the battle was lost. Another enemy inspired by Irish mythology are the Leanashes. The Leanashi is based on the Leanashi, which is a figure typically depicted as a beautiful woman that takes a human lover, which lives a brief but highly inspired life. The name means fairy lover. This is reflected by a quest where a fisherman falls in love with a Leanashi. This is, however, not the reason for the bizarre figure that appears in-game, with bat-like wings and hands, and a humanoid torso that has the lower half splitting into tentacles. This visual representation reflects the version of the myth that was popularized by Jane Wilde during the Celtic revival of the 19th century. In her depiction, the Leanashi has emphasized vampiric tendencies, sucking out the life out of their lovers until their eventual deaths. Speaking of Leanashis, while the world building is overall great, the game definitely drops the ball when it comes down to having side quests that help to establish this overarching story that tells the player more about the world. Most side quests are nothing but your regular run-of-the-mill MMO quests that require you to kill a bunch of enemies or gather 12 bear asses. If you know, you know. Very few of the side quests are memorable or add something to the world, and coincidentally, 2 of them involve Leanashis. One is the Fisherman quest that I previously mentioned, and the other is one called Height of Crime, where a gnome asks you to enter a cave where his friend went in but never returned. Once you find his dead body, you will be able to read the journal that describes that he was lured into the cave by a woman named Casca, and she was transformed into a Leanashi after a ritual. Once you stop reading the journal, a Leanashi, most likely Casca, appears. Another side quest that develops the origin of the monsters that appear in the world is Bell, Book and Candle. This one is very straightforward. It establishes that the Fey Gorta, the skeletal undead creatures roaming around, are the dead members of a family that was cursed to being risen into undeath whenever they die. Other side quests that are interesting are the ones that develop into quest lines, such as The Widow, a quest where you come across a village being tormented by endless waves of spiders. It turns out that it was a fate that is hostile to everyone, named the Widow, that has been commanding them to attack the village. At the end, you can either join the Widow or just kill her. Killing her is the better option because you get better rewards. So unless you really want to be evil by killing the whole village, there's no point in joining her. Another side quest that develops into a quest line is the one that you come across when walking down the plains of Iratel to the Tiri. You meet these strange NPCs that keep talking about having liberated the local village and sending them to the god of death, Balin. When you get in the village, the survivors ask for help. One of them says that his brother was seduced into the cult of Balin's Testament, a group of Testament fans that wish for them to return to the death metal days, but tired of falling into the death years of Chuck Billy, lost their sanity while relentlessly listening to Demonic and The Gathering non-stop, and ended up learning how to summon an Iskara Lord into this world. It turns out that when they summoned an Iskara Lord, he is still not as strong as he could be. So again, the Faithless One saves the day, but not without some minor setbacks. And it is worth noting that only 3 Niskaru lords are defeated throughout Kingdoms of Amalur. One is Balor during the story. Another one is defeated in this random side quest. And the last one is defeated in the faction questline of the Warsworn. Speaking of which, while side quests may not be something to write home about in this game, the faction quests are pretty good. The House of Ballads is the one that most players will probably find the first. The story is fairly simple, but one of the most interesting ones in this game. The House of Ballads is formed by the heroes of the Fae, and due to their immortal spirit nature, they keep coming back and reliving the same things that they have done once. The Maid of Windmere, who has always been the villain of the stories of the House of Ballads, has grown tired of playing this role and doing things that she doesn't want to, that she is just forced to do because she follows the script of these stories. So as the player joins the House of Ballads, everything starts going wrong, and at the end, they are given the choice to either join her and make the story different this time, or kill her and just keep things the same. If you kill her, the members of the House of Ballads approve of it, because you followed the script, but if you spare her, they get mad at you. But hey, I guess at least now you have a wife, even though it's not really like Skyrim. So, it doesn't really do much. But hey, if you feel bad for her for being forced to do something, well, that's the right choice. Another faction is the Warsworn. This one starts off as a pretty basic faction. It seems like nothing's going to happen, but then it escalates up until the point where you have to defeat an Niskaru Lord. It gives you the option to choose between helping the faction or helping the Niskaru Lord and killing everyone, which isn't really as polarizing as the first one. This one is more of a case that if you want to be evil so bad, then go for it, I guess. The Travelers are your quote-unquote Thieves Guild of this game. So this one for the most part just involves you praying to this figure called the Hierophant, and she gives you the directions to steal things. And that's cool and all up until the point where she's clearly trying to kill you and your friends. And then when you get to the last Traveler's camp, you discover that she's just the leader of this camp pretending to be the Hierophant. Which really makes me wonder how that even works when you're praying at the shrine and she's right there by your side. This must be like that episode of The Simpsons, Lisa the Skeptic, where at the end the guys of them all are talking through a phone pretending that they're the voice of the angel. So I imagine that it's something like that, but this one really makes your character dumbed down for some reason. Besides the voices of the Hierophant and this leader being the same, you also make some really stupid questions.
While you did this, I finally learned who the Hierophant is. Argene of Sun Camp.
But hey, at the end you're given another meaningless choice. Either help your friends that have been through the storm with you, or just betray them for no reason to help this woman. I wonder which option I'll choose. The other factions are the Scholi Arcana, that is basically the Mage Guild, where one of the founders has been sealed for centuries and has started possessing students to try to free herself. You release her, defeat her, and that's it. The House of Valors is an arena faction where you become part of the underdog team and the champion tries to cheat in every way, but ends up obviously losing the fight that was never winnable because he's fighting the protagonist of the game. It is a fun side content faction, and you can keep doing arena fights even after the story ends with random mobs, but the story itself is nothing special. And the House of Sorrows is probably the most underdeveloped faction. Based in Cluricon, you join this faction that is on the decline, and it turns out that the leader has turned into the Tuatha. You defeat him, everyone is dead, and now you reform the faction. While the side quests are overall not that interesting, and the faction questlines are generally good, the main story sets itself in a middle ground. The main story is pretty interesting up until the point that you kill Balor, and then it feels like the game is just trying to rush towards the end as quickly as possible. Right after ending the siege of Melsanshir, you're sent to destroy communication devices of the Tuatha. In one quest, you just went over 90% of this region. The 2 quests after send you to an island off the coast of Cluricon. And after that, you're sent to the end of the area to defeat the Guardian of the House of Pride to gain access to Alabastra. And that's it. That's Cluricon done. You barely even walked in there, and it's done. And if that was fast for you, don't worry, Alabastra is even faster. You meet up with your allies 2 times and straight to the end of the game. No exaggeration, the game sends you from the first zone of the Alabastra area straight to the last one. Then you fight on and get to the boss. So the pacing of this game is just messed up, because 9 out of the 14 main quests involve the building up and the battle of Melsanshir. And it makes sense that the battle is supposed to be the minor climax of the story before the greater climax that is the conclusion. But instead the game just throws you nearly instantly towards the end. And to make matters worse, the final climax isn't even that great anyway. You finally get to fight Gadflow, who up until this point has been hyped up as the Sauron/Lich King guy, a very powerful enemy who is the reason that this war exists. If you defeat him, this war is over. But then it turns out that it's just an illusion, and he is hidden in a place deeper within those chambers. You get in there, he boasts about bringing the creature that you have also heard since the middle of the game, Tirnoch, to this world. You think that you're gonna fight him and Tirnoch, whatever it is. And the game has made sure to make a mystery out of what Tirnoch is. Everyone who talks about it says that it's something horrific, something that no one can describe. You imagine everything, from an actual god, to an Icarus lord, to some eldritch abomination, and then it turns out it's just a dragon. And the dragon just immediately kills Gadflow, and he's just a pathetic loser that isn't even gonna fight you anyway. Okay, so now I guess we're fighting this big dragon. Oh, that should be fun, right? Fighting a big oh yeah, the dragon is summoning ads. Yeah, so we kill the ads, use reckoning mode, then we properly damage the dragon. Repeat. After your whole quest to get over here, you get to see the main villain that has been hyped up the entire game just die in front of you pathetically, and now you're fighting this dragon that is just Deathwing Spine 2.0. And everyone knows that WoW players really loved Spine of Deathwing. It's one of their favorite boss fights. No one was mad that when we finally got to fight Deathwing, we instead just took off the plates off his back. Yay! No, seriously, this is just the worst of all worlds. Gadflow just turns to be a pathetic character that was all talk. And you just fight this boss that is just a complete mess. And honestly, the pacing, the fact that Gadflow is just written off too quickly, and that the dragon doesn't even get time to be exposed as your main threat, are obviously signs that this game was truly rushed. But to understand why this happened, we must look at the development cycle of Kingdoms of Amalur. Kingdoms of Amalur development history is one of a recipe for disaster, with telling signs all over it that this game was doomed from the start. The game was the first and last game released by 38 Studios, a studio founded back in 2006 by professional baseball player Curt Schilling. He founded the company because he was a huge fan of EverQuest, and disliked the design choices taken in EverQuest 2, making him wish to make his own MMO. That MMO was Project Corpenicus, first mentioned in 2006 with a projected release in 2011, promised to be a World of Warcraft competitor set in the fantasy world of Amalur. The World of Amalur was supposed to spawn a multimedia franchise as Schilling compared it to a modern-day Lord of the Rings. Also, his studio projections were that when Project Corpenicus finally came out, it would make $100 million in annual profits. Yeah, that sounds way too ambitious for someone who's just starting out. Now, for anyone familiar with the ins and outs of game design, the fact that the first game that Schilling wanted to develop was an MMO is a huge red flag. A mistake that later he acknowledged himself. If that wasn't enough, the financial decisions were very telling. Schilling made sure to hire a bunch of expensive names to his project while he wasn't even sure where to head at that point. Robert Anthony Salvatore, writer of The Legend of Drizzt and the Demon Wars saga, was hired to create the lore of the game. Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn, was hired to handle the artistic decisions of the game, and Steve Denuser, formerly a designer of EverQuest, as game director. While in the middle of the rocky development of Project Corpenicus, 38 studios couldn't keep themselves out of trouble. Trying to bite off more than they could chew, they acquired Big Huge Games as a subsidiary in 2009. The studio had been working on a game prototype since 2007, and this prototype was repurposed as Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, a single-player RPG to be published by EA. While Kingdoms of Amalur was being developed and developers were trying to salvage the mess that was Project Corpenicus, the financial troubles that could be seen from a mile away started to catch up with 38 studios. In one of the strangest twists of fate, after struggling to find investors to help, as they all could see the doom fated for the studio, Curt Schilling successfully negotiated a financial agreement with the Rhode Island for a loan of $75 million to help fund his projects with the condition that the company would move to the state. Obviously, this loan didn't save the studio at all, and instead further complicated their situation. Rhode Island didn't give them a helping hand, but a noose instead, and Schilling gladly accepted it with a smile in his face. By the start of 2012, 38 Studios was nearly done for. Kingdoms of Amalur was their last hope. It had to sell 2 million copies for Schilling's company to break even. And it sold 1,003,000 instead, putting the final nail in the coffin of the company. That ended up declaring bankruptcy, and its assets were handed over to the state of Rhode Island. The signs of Kingdoms of Amalur being rushed are a reflection of 38 Studios' desperate attempts to break even financially and juggle its development with Project Corpenicus. There was a clear lack of direction among the developers that led to the eventual cancellation of the MMO and some lackluster aspects in the single-player game. Like mentioned before, many quests are obviously cookie-cutter MMO quests, repurposed for a single-player game in a hurry, and the drastic drop-off in content that is noticeable starting from the theory all the way to the end of the game is a clear sign of a rushed development trying to meet deadlines. If the game had 1 or maybe 2 more years of development to polish some of the rough edges, maybe none of these problems would be present in the final release. The poor financial decisions that haunted the company are also clear. 38 Studios was loaded with industry veterans that weren't cheap to keep around. And in Kingdoms of Amalur, it is noticeable that even the voice cast was insanely expensive. With famous voice actors such as resident edgelord voice Lionel Bryan, and Laura Bailey, at the time one of the most requested voice actresses in the game industry, to provide voices to some random characters that you probably wouldn't even remember about after playing through the game. 38 Studios were definitely not afraid to throw as much money as they could on every aspect of their games, before they could even take their time and set their objectives. Spend money, ask questions later. They wanted a game so rugged nobody could touch it, spent $1 million in tracks and went over their budget. Now how the hell were they supposed to get out of debt? They can't dev anymore, they just murdered the alpha devs. The clear amateurism of 38 Studios is on one hand funny to see, and on the other hand sad to see. This is an example of a man who had a dream but never took the time to actually understand the industry that he was attempting to step into and plan out how to reach his objectives. He just threw money at everything and hoped that it worked. 38 Studios tried to fly too high for their own good. Their wax wings were burned by the sun, and Schilling's dream came crashing down back to the rough reality of game development. Kingdoms of Amalur was supposed to kick off a massive RPG franchise that would be followed up by the MMO Project Corpenicus, dreamed by Schilling to be a juggernaut capable of bumping heads with World of Warcraft. But instead, it failed to generate enough profits for 38 Studios to stay alive long enough to get to that point. Kingdoms of Amalur's fall into the realm of forgotten games can be attributed to many factors. The first one is that most people that talk about this game bring up nearly every time. It came out during the period that Skyrim took over the RPG genre, and completely outshined every other game in the genre. Most people couldn't care less about another RPG, while one of gaming's biggest phenomena was still fresh and new. While there's certainly some validity to the claims that Skyrim stole Kingdoms of Amalur's thunder, they are not enough to justify why the game never took off even after the Skyrim hype settled down. Dark Souls, for example, was drowned out for a while amidst Skyrim's success, but re-emerged more popular than ever as an incredibly influential game, bringing everyone's attention towards FromSoft games. And now we see the reverberations of this success in Elden Ring. Dark Souls, even if it didn't seem like a success at first to Bandai Namco, was a memorable game with unique gameplay and style. And that's exactly the second point. While Kingdoms of Amalur is a good game and can be a lot of fun, it isn't memorable and it barely brings anything new to the table. The story and the characters are forgettable, the combat is fun but doesn't get too deep, most quests are straightforward and decisions and persuasion checks are merely an illusion, the base world is good but they don't really do anything interesting with it, there are no random events, the quests just send you rushing through the map and some enemies feel like they are placed to waste your time rather than having a real purpose. The game feels very linear and the developers didn't seem to want to take any risks bringing new things into it. Lastly, the game really failed to pick up public interest even before its release, which ended up burying it for many people. I, for one, never heard about it until more than 5 years after it was released, and considering that the game didn't really stand out for many, word of mouth definitely didn't play a part in helping this game sell. I joked about it at the beginning of the video, but Ellen might be unironically single-handedly carrying the franchise at this point, because I've never seen anyone champion this game harder than her. To sum it up, Kingdoms of Amalur is definitely not a bad game by any means, but it doesn't stand out when compared to other RPGs. It suffered during its development from poor studio decisions that ended up harming the final product. For many players, it wasn't worth recommending to others. It didn't help that it was trying to fly before learning to walk, competing for the sky with the giant that was Skyrim. It may have been forgotten by most, but it might be worth giving it a try. It will not blow your mind, but it can be good fun as long as you don't expect much. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.